Hello art students, Miss Warner here with our next flip lesson video. In this flip lesson video, we're going to be going over our next upcoming project, and that is creative color wheels. And with our color wheels, we're going to be working with watercolor, which is a medium we have already worked with before in our 3D mat board sculptures. Now, we've already gone over techniques and how to work with these, and we've gotten comfortable with watercolor, but we're also working with another medium for our next upcoming project, and that is pen and ink, other known as dip pens. Now, before we start working with pen and ink in our next class period, I want you guys to get prepared and know exactly what pen and ink is. So in this lesson video, I'm going to be teaching you guys what is pen and ink, what are the parts of pen and ink, and how do they work. And then I'm also going to be getting you guys used to working with permanent mediums. Now, pen and ink is a permanent medium. And in our art class, we haven't worked with a lot of permanent mediums. We're very used to being able to draw and put down our work, and if we make a mistake, we're able to erase it. But this is a little bit different. Once it's put on paper, we can't go back. It's there. So in this video, I'm going to be having you guys work with ballpoint pens. Now that we're talking about that, if you guys need to get prepared and get your materials before you start watching the rest of this video, now's a good time. So if you need to pause the video, what you guys need is a ballpoint pen. You also will need a pencil to fill out these worksheets, which is something else you will need for this video. I gave this to you guys in the last class period, and all it has is a diagram and then some boxes of techniques that we're going to be working with our ballpoint pens. So if you need to grab those, pause this video, go grab them real quick, and then come back. And for the final part of this video, what I'm going to be showing you guys is a clip of a YouTuber. She's worked with pen and ink before and with watercolor, and she's mixed these mediums together. So I'm going to have you guys watch that clip for the end of our video just to give you guys a nice little visual of how pen and ink works with our watercolor. And with all of that said, I hope you guys are excited to dive right into this new material, because I am. Let's get started. So, like I said, the first part of this video, we're going to be going over what is pen and ink. And then we're going to be going over the different parts of pen and ink and how those parts work. And then to top it all off, you guys are going to be watching a YouTube video of what those materials look like. So, what are dip pens? Essentially, they're exactly what they sound like. They're these special pens that you dip into an ink called Indian ink. Now, these pens are a lot different from what we're used to, like with ballpoint pens, where the ink is constantly being drawn to the tip for us. Now, with dip pens, it's exactly what it sounds like. We have to dip the tip of our pens into our Indian ink. Now, when we work with this special kind of medium and material, we can get pretty cool pieces of artwork like this, or like this. But what we'll be creating for our next project is something more like this, our creative color wheels. And these are just a couple examples of what students have done in the past. So, now that we've talked about what pen and ink is, we can move on to the parts of our dip pens. Now, this would be a good time to pull out your guys' worksheets and start following along with that diagram on the left side and start filling out your answers. Now, dip pens have two different parts to them. There's the handles, which is what we hold on to when we're working with these mediums, and then there's the nib. Now, the nib is what makes these mediums pretty special and different from normal pens that we work with, like ballpoint pens. These nibs are interchangeable. You can pull them out of your handles and put different ones in. They have all different shapes and all different sizes that create different lines and widths with the ink that you're working with. Now, if you look closely at a nib, you'll notice that there's a split down the middle of it, and there's also a hole in the middle of it. Now, what these are, the hole is actually called a breathing hole or a vent, and it acts as a well that holds all your ink. And then the split acts kind of like a road from your well onto your paper. The split is called a channel or a split. And when pressure is applied to your nib, all the ink that was held in your well goes down that split or that channel onto your paper. And the amount of ink that goes onto your paper can be controlled through the amount of pressure that you put on your nib. Now, if we review over these parts, there's the handle, then there's the nibs, and then on your nibs you have your breathing hole or your vent, and then you also have your ink channel or your split. Now we've gone over the parts of our pen and ink, and we've actually already gone over how they work, so we could check that off too. Alright, so you guys now know how pen and ink works. So now what I'd like you guys to do is get used to permanent mediums. Now, like I said before, pen and ink is a permanent medium. We're so used to being able to work with pencils, and if we put a mark down, we're usually able to go back in and erase it. Now with pen and ink and watercolor, it's going to be a little bit different. If we put a mark down, we're not going to be able to go back and erase it. So I want you guys to get used to working with permanent materials. Now, this would be a good time to take those worksheets out again, and we're going to be working with the squares next to your diagram. In those squares, what you guys are going to be doing is working with different values, different textures, different line work, and just really getting used to handling that permanent medium and not being able to go back in and erasing your marks. Now, in the next part of this video, I'm going to go in and go over each one of these images and explain kind of what they're asking. Now, if you're kind of already getting the gist of what these images look like, you can actually skip ahead of my descriptive stuff and move on to the next part. Now, if you need to pause the video and look at images a little bit longer, feel free to do so. Pause it, look at an image, maybe skip ahead if you need help, and listen to me to describe the image. Look through that, listen through that as well. So now we're going to be working on our techniques with our ballpoint pen, not a pencil, a ballpoint pen with permanent mediums, getting used to that and getting prepared for our pen and ink for our next class period. So go ahead, work with those techniques, work on your worksheet, and then we're going to finish up with that YouTube video. Now, this is the completed worksheet, so if you need to pause it at this point and just look at a zoomed out look of the worksheet, you can do so. I'm going to go over each row and each line. Now, this top row, what it is the one on the left is just some variation of a value scale of some horizontal lines. The second one is cross-hatching, and the third one is a little bit of a mixture of hatching, patchy hatching here and there of some different value scales. On the second line, that one on the left, is some vertical lines, just really working on getting those even spaces in between your lines. And then at the bottom of it is some gesture-like lines or some scribbles. With that second one, kind of the same concept, where you're working with some texture in that top part and then stippling in the bottom part. The third one is some more movement-like lines and working on the spacing. And then that bottom part is cross-hatching. For that third line, you're working with some more textures and line direction variation. You're creating some different textures going vertical and then horizontal on that first one. The second one, same thing, vertical and horizontal wavy lines. And then the third one is actually the same thing, vertical and some actual diagonal lines, working on that spacing in between your fine lines. Okay, on that fourth row, the one on the left side is some more vertical lines focusing on the spacing between your lines. The second one is some more cross-hatching. And then the third one is stippling. And remember, when you're stippling, just really take your time. I know it takes a lot of patience to do it, but just really take your time. Stippling actually gets a great effect with pen and ink. So getting used to that and getting comfortable with it when you're working with your ballpoint pen can help you get used to that when you're working with it in our next class period with our pen and ink. Alright, so now let's move on to that last line. The last one is working on some more textures. That one on the left is kind of like the one that we worked with in the top row. Just getting some of that patchy hatching and getting different kinds of texture. That second one, you're filling in different lines and spaces, creating different values. And then with that last one is just some gesture or scribble-like lines. Alright, hopefully this helped. If you guys still have any more questions about this, you can bring them into class and I can help break them down a little bit more if you're struggling with these images. Alright, so you should be done with those techniques now. If you're not and you need to still go over and look at some of those images, feel free to rewind, rewatch, re-listen, and just try and get those techniques down with your ballpoint pen. Now we're going to move on to our last part of our flipped lesson plan, and that is our nice YouTube video. So this gal, she makes a lot of YouTube videos on different kinds of mediums and techniques to work with those mediums. She's really quirky, she's funny, and she's great to listen to and just watch. She's very passionate about what she does. So go ahead, enjoy this last clip, and then I will meet you back afterwards. Enjoy.
Liquid black India ink is one of my top materials. I use a lot of watercolor, but anytime you see me drawing with black outlines, I'm using liquid India ink. This kind of ink has been used for centuries for calligraphy, drawings, and paintings, and more recently, it's very popular with cartoons and comic book illustrators. You can draw or paint with it, you can dilute it to make gray tones. It's water soluble, so it's very easy to clean, although it will stain clothing, so don't give it to your toddler just yet. And once it's fully dry, it's waterproof, which is why I love using it with watercolors. I can lay down my black lines, and when it's totally dry, you can paint over it. No smudging, no bleeding. Dip pens. These are the pens that you dip into the ink and draw with. And they come in two parts. There's the handle and the nib. The nib is designed to pull the ink up into it. There's a bunch of different kinds of nibs out there with different purposes, from calligraphy to drawing. They come in different sizes. Some are more flexible and sensitive than others. So it's really a matter of experimenting and figuring out what works for you. To use the pens, insert the nib into the handle. It should fit pretty snugly. You'll notice that the tip of the nib has a split down the center. You can see it when you put the nib to paper and add a little bit of pressure. Now that leads to the vent, or the hole in the nib. This is the well that draws up the ink. There is no ink stored within the pen. You'll need to continuously go back to your jar and dip the pen into the ink to load it up. When you dip the pen, you don't want to dip it too deep. Submerge the nib just above the well and be sure to let any excess ink drip off before putting it to paper. It also helps to hold the pen at a flatter angle instead of upright like a ballpoint pen. Technically, you're drawing with a pen, but physically, it's more like handling a brush. Light pressure, low angle. Try making strokes that start with a light pressure and then add harder pressure and then light again. And you'll notice that you can affect the thickness of the lines this way. When you run out of ink, just return to the jar as you need to. Practice and get familiar with the feel. You can create fine lines or thick, heavy lines with just one stroke using these pens. That's the magic that they have. There's a charm to them. It's almost like anything you write using these pens will be elegant and timeless. After inking, be sure to clean your tools to ensure that they last. Nibs should be removed from the handle and wiped down with a damp towel. Let's talk about technique. Pressure. As I mentioned, the pressure you put on your pen or brush will influence the thickness of your lines, also known as weight. One strength that these materials have is that you can create lines that fluctuate in weight, all in one stroke. Even if you're just making a simple ink outline with no shading, altering the weight of the lines can add depth and imply lighting and really make your drawing pop. Hatching. To create texture or shading, you can make many parallel lines side by side, called hatching. This, I find, is easier with the pen. Create cross-hatching by making a series of crisscross lines side by side. The further apart the lines are, the lighter the tone will be. The closer the lines are to each other, the darker the tone. Hatching can be clean and straight lines, or it can be a jumble of scribbly lines, according to the tone and the effect and the texture that you're going for. Stipple is much like hatching, but instead of lines, you're creating with dots, either using a pen or a brush. The closer together the dots, the darker the tone, the more sparse and spaced, the lighter the tone. Experiment, play, sketch, doodle, fill your sketchbook with thousands of terrible ink drawings. The more you handle it, the more comfortable you'll be working with liquid black India ink. I hope this video was helpful to you, and thank you very much for watching.
Alright, so that finishes up our flipped lesson plan. So guys, your worksheet should be done by now. If not, like I said before, you can rewind, you can rewatch, you can re-listen, and just go back on things that you maybe have missed, or maybe you want to rewatch a part of the video just because it was that cool. Well, make sure you bring back your completed lesson plans and be prepared and be excited to work with pen and ink when we get back. I'll see you in class, guys. Have a nice day.